The morning sun painted the Pacific coastline in shades of gold and amber as Sarah Martinez made her way down the familiar rocky path to Mendocino Beach. Her canvas bag bounced against her hip with each careful step, already containing the tools of her passion: magnifying glass, small brush, specimen containers, and a weathered field guide to Pacific Coast shells. At 28, Sarah had been collecting shells for over 2 decades, a hobby that began when her grandmother first showed her how to identify the delicate spirals of a moon snail shell. Sarah worked as a marine biologist at the nearby Mendocino Coast Research Station, but her weekends belonged to the hunt for perfect specimens. She wasn't interested in the common tourist finds that littered the more accessible beaches. Sarah sought the rare, the unusual, the shells that told stories of deep ocean currents and mysterious underwater landscapes. Her small apartment was filled with carefully catalogued displays, each shell labeled with its scientific name, location found, and date of discovery. This particular Saturday promised to be exceptional. The previous night's storm had churned the ocean, and Sarah knew that powerful waves often brought treasures from the depths. She picked her way across the tide pools, her experienced eye scanning for the telltale glint of something extraordinary among the kelp and sea foam. The beach stretched before her like a vast treasure map. Most visitors would see only sand, rocks, and scattered debris. Sarah saw potential everywhere. That dark patch near the waterline might hide abalone shells. The cluster of rocks could shelter delicate angel wing shells in their crevices. Every step was a possibility, every glint of white or spiral of calcium carbonate a potential discovery. As she rounded a large boulder that marked her favorite hunting ground, Sarah noticed she wasn't alone. About 50 yards down the beach, a figure sat motionless on a driftwood log, facing the ocean. Even from a distance, something about the person's posture spoke of discipline and alertness. The stranger wore simple civilian clothes, but there was something unmistakably military in the way he held himself, the precise positioning of his body, the constant subtle scanning of his surroundings. Sarah continued her search, occasionally glancing toward the mysterious figure. She found several promising specimens, including a nearly perfect purple olive shell and what appeared to be a rare cone shell fragment. But her curiosity about the stranger grew with each passing hour. He hadn't moved from his position, seemingly lost in meditation or deep thought while watching the horizon. The sun climbed higher, and Sarah worked her way closer to where the man sat. As she approached, she could see he was older than she'd initially thought, perhaps in his early 40s, with graying temples and hands that bore small scars and calluses. His eyes, when they briefly met hers, were remarkably calm and focused, the kind of gaze that seemed to take in everything while revealing nothing. "Beautiful morning for collecting," he said quietly, his voice carrying easily over the sound of the waves despite its soft tone. There was something in his accent that suggested travels to distant places, though Sarah couldn't quite place where he might be from. "The best kind," Sarah replied, holding up her specimen bag. "The storms always bring up interesting things from deeper water." "I'm Sarah, by the way." "Marcus," he responded with a slight nod. His attention returned to the ocean, but Sarah sensed he was still aware of every movement around him. "What's the most interesting thing you found out here?" Sarah settled onto a nearby rock, grateful for the opportunity to share her passion with someone who seemed genuinely interested. She told him about the paper nautilus shell she'd discovered the previous spring, a delicate, white treasure that had somehow survived its journey from the deep Pacific intact. She described the thrill of finding her first intact sand dollar, the patience required to search for the tiny, perfect specimens that most people overlooked. As she talked, Marcus listened with an attention that was both flattering and slightly unnerving. He asked thoughtful questions about shell formation, ocean currents, and the relationship between storm patterns and what washed ashore. His questions revealed a surprising knowledge of oceanography and marine ecosystems, though he deflected when Sarah asked about his background. "I've spent time near a lot of different oceans," was all he would say, but something in his tone suggested those experiences hadn't been vacation-related. They fell into a comfortable rhythm over the next few hours. Sarah continued her systematic search while Marcus remained on his driftwood perch, occasionally pointing out areas where debris had collected or where the sand patterns suggested promising hunting grounds. His observations were remarkably accurate, and Sarah found herself discovering more interesting specimens than usual. During a particularly successful dive into a tide pool that yielded 2 perfect limpet shells, Sarah noticed Marcus studying something in the distance with intense concentration. Following his gaze, she saw only ocean and sky, but Marcus seemed to be tracking something she couldn't detect. "What do you see out there?" she asked, joining him on the log. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, then pointed toward a barely visible speck on the horizon. "Fishing boat, probably about 3 miles out. See the wake pattern? They're trolling for salmon, moving southwest at maybe 8 knots. Sarah squinted hard but could barely make out what he was referring to. "How can you tell all that from here?" A smile played at the corners of Marcus's mouth. "Practice. Lots of practice reading distances and details. It becomes second nature after a while." "What kind of work do you do that requires that kind of observation skill?" Again, Marcus deflected, but Sarah was beginning to piece together clues. The way he moved with economy and purpose, his unconscious habit of positioning himself where he could see both directions of the beach, his ability to read minute details at extreme distances, all suggested military training. Specialized training. As the afternoon wore on, their conversation ranged from marine biology to travel stories to books they'd both read. Marcus proved to be well-educated and widely traveled, though he spoke about distant places in terms of landscapes and local customs rather than tourist attractions. Sarah found herself genuinely enjoying his company, something that surprised her given how carefully he guarded details about his life. When she mentioned her work at the research station, Marcus showed particular interest in her studies of deep-water mollusks and the migration patterns that brought unusual specimens to the surface. He asked detailed questions about ocean floor topography and the effect of underwater geographic features on current patterns. "You know a lot about oceanography for someone who won't tell me what they do for a living," Sarah observed with a laugh. "I've had reasons to pay attention to water, weather, and geography," Marcus said simply. Understanding environment can be the difference between success and failure in a lot of situations. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Sarah reluctantly began packing her specimens. She'd found an exceptional variety of shells, including several she'd never discovered in this location before. But, more than that, she'd enjoyed spending the day with someone who appreciated both the patience required for her hobby and the deeper patterns that governed what the ocean chose to reveal. "Will you be back tomorrow?" she asked as she shouldered her bag. Marcus nodded toward the ocean. "I come here most mornings. It helps me think." "About what?" For the first time that day, Marcus's calm demeanor showed a crack of something deeper, perhaps sadness or regret. "About precision. About the difference between what you intend to do and what actually happens. About second chances." Sarah sensed there was a story behind those words, but she also recognized that Marcus wasn't ready to share it. Instead, she told him about her routine, how she usually arrived at sunrise and spent the morning hours searching the areas where the tide had retreated during the night. "Maybe I'll see you tomorrow then," she said. "Maybe you will." As Sarah climbed back up the path toward her car, she found herself looking forward to the next morning in a way that had nothing to do with shell collecting. There was something about Marcus that intrigued her beyond his mysterious background. He possessed a stillness that was rare in her experience, a quality of attention that made her feel like her words and thoughts mattered. That evening, as she carefully cleaned and catalogued her day's finds, Sarah's mind kept returning to their conversation. She found herself wondering what kind of work had taught him to read distances and details with such precision, what experiences had given him that particular combination of worldly knowledge and careful guardedness. She researched military occupations that might require extreme observational skills, reading about forward observers, reconnaissance specialists, and snipers. The more she learned, the more convinced she became that Marcus's background involved some form of specialized military service. But, rather than making her uncomfortable, this possibility only deepened her curiosity. Sarah had always been drawn to precision and patience in her own work. The careful observation required to distinguish between similar shell species, the systematic approach needed to find rare specimens, the detailed record-keeping that made her collection valuable for research, all reflected her appreciation for methodical excellence. Perhaps that was what she recognized in Marcus, she thought as she placed her newest specimens in their designated display cases.
He possessed the same appreciation for precision, the same understanding that meaningful results required patience, careful observation, and attention to detail.
As she prepared for bed, Sarah found herself already planning the next morning's shell hunting expedition. But, for the first time in years, the prospect of discovery wasn't limited to what the ocean might reveal. She was equally curious about what she might learn about the mysterious man who could read stories in distant boat wakes and spoke about precision with the gravity of someone who understood its life and death importance. The storm had brought more than unusual shells to Mendocino Beach. It had brought Marcus, and Sarah had a feeling that her peaceful, predictable routine was about to become far more interesting than she'd ever imagined. She fell asleep to the sound of waves against the shore, already anticipating sunrise and the possibilities it might bring. Sarah arrived at the beach the next morning to find Marcus already in position on his usual driftwood log, a steaming cup of coffee in his hands and a small backpack beside him. The early light revealed details she hadn't noticed the previous day: the precise way he'd arranged his gear, the unconscious habit of keeping his dominant hand free, the way his eyes tracked movement across the entire span of the beach before focusing on any single point. "You're an early riser," she called as she approached, her own coffee growing cold in the travel mug she'd forgotten to drink from during her eager drive to the beach. "Old habits," Marcus replied, raising his cup in greeting. "How did your specimens turn out?" Sarah was touched that he remembered and cared about her previous day's finds. She pulled out her phone to show him photos of the cleaned and catalogued shells, explaining the rarity of several pieces and the stories they told about deep ocean conditions. Marcus examined each image with the same focused attention he'd given to the distant fishing boat, asking technical questions that revealed an understanding of marine ecosystems that went far beyond casual interest. "The cone shell fragment is particularly interesting," he observed. "The coloration pattern suggests it came from depths where the light spectrum is completely different from surface conditions." Sarah looked at him with surprise. "That's exactly right. How do you know that level of detail about deep water shell development?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, seeming to weigh how much to reveal. "I've spent time underwater. In places where understanding your environment down to the smallest detail could save your life." The admission hung in the air between them, confirming Sarah's suspicions about his military background while raising new questions about what kind of underwater operations required such detailed environmental knowledge. She decided not to push for more information, sensing that Marcus shared what he was comfortable sharing and no more. Instead, she began her morning shell hunt, working her way along the tideline where the previous night's waves had deposited a new layer of possibilities. Marcus remained on his perch, but she noticed he wasn't simply sitting passively. His attention moved constantly, tracking birds, boats, beachcombers, and changes in wave patterns with systematic precision. After an hour of searching, Sarah made an exceptional discovery. Hidden in a cluster of seaweed, she found what appeared to be a juvenile giant Pacific octopus shell, something that should have been impossible to find intact at this depth and location. She carefully extracted it from its hiding place, her excitement growing as she realized the significance of the find. "Marcus, you have to see this," she called, holding up the delicate specimen. "This shell has no business being here. Giant Pacific octopus juveniles live at depths of at least 200 feet, and they're usually found much farther north." Marcus approached to examine her discovery, and Sarah noticed how he moved across the uneven terrain without seeming to think about foot placement or balance. His attention was completely focused on the shell she held, but his body automatically navigated obstacles and maintained perfect stability. "What would bring it here?" he asked, taking the shell gently and examining it with obvious appreciation for its rarity. "That's what makes this so exciting," Sarah explained. "Either this represents an unusual migration pattern, or the storm conditions were so severe that they pulled specimens from much deeper and farther north than normal. Either way, it's a significant finding." As she spoke about ocean current patterns and the implications of her discovery, Sarah noticed Marcus's attention shift slightly. His eyes moved beyond her to scan the beach, and she realized he was tracking something new. Following his gaze, she saw a figure in the distance, someone walking purposefully along the waterline in their direction. "Friend of yours?" Marcus asked quietly, his tone neutral but somehow more alert. Sarah squinted at the approaching figure and recognized Dr. James Patterson, the research station director and her immediate supervisor. He was wearing his usual weekend casual clothes, but his pace and posture suggested this wasn't a social visit. "That's my boss," she said, waving as Dr. Patterson spotted them and changed direction to approach directly.
"He doesn't usually come to this beach."
Dr. Patterson was slightly out of breath when he reached them, and his usual professional demeanor seemed strained. "Sarah, I'm sorry to interrupt your weekend, but we have a situation at the station."
"We need your expertise immediately." "What kind of situation?"
Sarah asked, already mentally cataloging the ongoing research projects that might require her weekend attention. "We've detected some unusual seismic activity offshore, and it's affecting the deep water monitoring equipment. But, more importantly, we've received several reports of marine life appearing in locations where they shouldn't be. Including what sounds like exactly what you're holding." Sarah looked down at the octopus shell in her hands, then back at Dr. Patterson.
"You think the seismic activity is causing deep water species to move into shallow areas?" "That's what we need to determine. The Coast Guard is asking for our assessment because it might indicate larger environmental changes that could affect shipping and fishing operations." Marcus had remained quietly observant during this exchange, but Sarah noticed his attention sharpen when Dr. Patterson mentioned the Coast Guard and shipping operations. She made quick introductions, describing Marcus as a fellow beach enthusiast she'd met while shell collecting. "Any chance you have experience with oceanographic equipment?"
Dr. Patterson asked Marcus hopefully. "We're short-staffed this weekend, and, frankly, we could use all the help we can get." Sarah expected Marcus to politely decline, but instead he asked several specific questions about the seismic activity patterns and the type of monitoring equipment involved. His questions revealed a technical knowledge that went far beyond casual interest, and Dr. Patterson's expression grew increasingly hopeful as he realized Marcus might actually be qualified to assist. "I have some experience with underwater monitoring systems," Marcus said finally.
"Different context, but the principles are similar."
Within an hour, Sarah found herself working alongside Marcus in the research station's main lab, surrounded by banks of computers displaying real-time ocean floor data, seismic readings, and marine life tracking information. Marcus had adapted to the sophisticated equipment with remarkable speed, asking pointed questions about calibration and data interpretation that impressed even Dr. Patterson.
The picture that emerged from their analysis was concerning.
The seismic activity wasn't random but seemed to follow a pattern that suggested possible underwater landslide activity along the continental shelf. If confirmed, this could explain the unusual marine life migrations and potentially pose risks to underwater infrastructure and marine ecosystems. "We need to verify this with direct observation," Dr. Patterson said, studying the data displays. "But our underwater drone is designed for shallow water work.
We'd need specialized deep water equipment to confirm what's happening at these depths."
Marcus studied the bathymetric charts showing the ocean floor topography, his expression thoughtful.
"What's the deepest you can get reliable visual confirmation with existing equipment?" "Maybe 600 feet in ideal conditions," Dr. Patterson replied.
"But the area showing the strongest seismic signatures is at least twice that deep." Sarah watched Marcus process this information, seeing the wheels turn behind his calm exterior. She had the distinct impression he was weighing options and calculating possibilities in ways that went beyond the scientific problem at hand. "There might be alternative approaches," Marcus said carefully. "Depending on what level of precision you need and what resources are available." Dr. Patterson leaned forward with interest. "What kind of alternatives?" Instead of answering directly, Marcus asked about the research station's relationship with various government agencies, the timeline for needing answers, and the potential consequences of the seismic activity if left unaddressed. His questions revealed a sophisticated understanding of how scientific research interfaced with government operations and emergency response protocols. As the afternoon progressed, Sarah found herself increasingly fascinated by Marcus's contributions to their analysis. He brought a perspective that combined scientific understanding with practical experience in what she was beginning to realize were probably classified operations. He could interpret the data with the skill of a trained scientist, but he also understood implications and applications that went far beyond academic interest. When Dr. Patterson stepped out to make phone calls to various agency contacts, Sarah seized the opportunity to satisfy her growing curiosity. "You're not just someone who spent time underwater, are you?" she asked directly. "You have specialized training in deep water operations." Marcus looked up from the seismic display he'd been studying. "What makes you think that?" "The way you ask questions. The way you understand the implications of what we're seeing here. The way you can interpret equipment you've supposedly never used before." Sarah paused, then took a chance. "I think you're military. Special operations. And I think your expertise is exactly what we need to solve this problem." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying Sarah's face as if weighing how much trust she deserved. Finally, he reached into his backpack and pulled out a business card with minimal information, just his name and a phone number with a government prefix. "Marcus Chen, former Navy SEAL," he said simply. "Specialized in underwater reconnaissance and long-range precision operations. Currently between assignments and trying to decide what comes next." Sarah felt a mix of vindication at having guessed correctly and excitement at the implications. "So when you talked about understanding environment and precision being the difference between success and failure, I was talking about operations where precise environmental assessment could determine mission success and whether team members came home alive." Marcus's expression grew more serious. "The skills transfer to other applications, including scientific research." Dr. Patterson returned to find them deep in discussion about underwater survey techniques that Marcus apparently knew far more about than any civilian should. When Marcus offered to help develop a survey plan using resources that might be available through his government connections, Dr. Patterson readily agreed. Over the next several hours, Sarah watched Marcus transform their urgent scientific problem into what amounted to a tactical operation. He made phone calls that apparently reached people with access to specialized equipment and expertise. He analyzed their data requirements with the same systematic approach she imagined he'd once applied to military objectives. By evening, Marcus had arranged for a deep-water survey mission that would take place the following day, using equipment and personnel that Dr. Patterson hadn't even known were available for civilian research support. The plan was ambitious and comprehensive, designed to gather definitive data about the seismic activity and its environmental effects. "How did you arrange all this?" Sarah asked as they reviewed the mission timeline Marcus had developed. "The same skills that made me good at my previous job," Marcus replied. "Understanding what resources are available, who controls them, and how to match capabilities to requirements. Plus, this situation has implications beyond marine biology. If there's significant underwater instability, it could affect national security infrastructure." As they prepared to leave the research station, Sarah realized that her peaceful shell collecting routine had been completely disrupted in the most unexpected way. She'd started the weekend hoping to add a few interesting specimens to her collection, and instead found herself involved in what appeared to be a significant scientific and potentially security-related investigation. More than that, she'd discovered that the mysterious man she'd met on the beach possessed exactly the kind of precise, methodical expertise that she'd always admired. Marcus approached problems with the same careful observation and systematic analysis that made her good at marine biology, but applied to challenges that carried far higher stakes than anything she'd ever confronted. Walking back to their cars in the research station parking lot, Sarah looked at Marcus with new appreciation for the complexity hidden behind his calm exterior. Tomorrow's survey mission would either confirm their theories about the seismic activity or force them to develop new explanations for what they were observing. Either way, Sarah suspected that her introduction to Marcus's specialized world of precision operations was just beginning. The shell collecting that had brought them together seemed almost quaint compared to the deep-water mysteries they were preparing to explore together. The deep-water survey mission launched at dawn from a Coast Guard facility 30 miles south of Mendocino. Sarah stood on the deck of the research vessel watching Marcus coordinate with a team of Navy specialists who had arrived during the night with equipment she'd never seen outside of documentaries about deep-sea exploration. The transformation in Marcus was remarkable. The quiet, contemplative man from the beach had become a focused operations commander, speaking in technical shorthand with technicians who clearly respected his expertise. The ROV is rated for depths up to 2,000 feet, Lieutenant Commander Jessica Torres explained as her team prepared the remotely operated vehicle for deployment. We've modified the standard sensor package based on Dr. Martinez's specifications for geological and marine biological observation. Sarah watched the preparations with growing excitement and nervousness. The underwater drone was a sophisticated piece of equipment worth more than her annual salary, equipped with high-definition cameras, sonar mapping capability, water sampling systems, and seismic sensors. More importantly, it was operated by a crew that clearly had experience with missions where precision and reliability weren't just scientific preferences but operational necessities. Marcus stood beside her at the rail, studying bathymetric charts and weather data with the same focused attention he'd given to distant boats from his driftwood perch. But Sarah could sense a different energy in him now, the alertness of someone preparing for a mission where details mattered in ways that went beyond academic interest. Nervous, he asked quietly, noticing her fidgeting with her field notebook. Excited, Sarah replied. And maybe a little overwhelmed. Yesterday I was looking for shells, and today I'm part of a deep water survey mission with the Navy. Marcus smiled, the first completely relaxed expression she'd seen from him. The best discoveries usually happen when you're prepared to recognize something important that you weren't specifically looking for. The ROV deployment went smoothly, with Marcus serving as liaison between the Navy crew and the research team. Sarah watched the monitor displays as the underwater vehicle descended through layers of marine life toward the ocean floor coordinates where their data suggested the most significant seismic activity was occurring. At 800 feet, the cameras revealed the edge of an underwater canyon system that didn't appear on any of their charts. The rocky walls dropped away into darkness beyond the ROV's light range, and the geological formations suggested complex underwater topography that could explain the unusual seismic patterns they'd observed. This is new, Dr. Patterson said, studying the video feed. These canyon formations weren't in any of our previous surveys. Marcus leaned over the control console, asking the ROV operator to adjust camera angles and lighting to better reveal the geological details. How recent could this formation be? The sediment patterns suggest very recent development, Sarah observed, pointing to areas where the rock faces showed no biological growth or sediment accumulation. This could be the result of underwater landslide activity triggered by seismic movement. As the ROV explored the canyon system, they discovered evidence that confirmed their theories and raised new questions. The deep-water marine life they observed included species that should have been much farther offshore, supporting Sarah's hypothesis that seismic activity was disrupting normal habitat patterns. But, more concerning, they found evidence of ongoing instability in the rock formations. Look at this, Lieutenant Commander Torres said, highlighting an area on the sonar display. These readings suggest there's a significant void space behind this rock face. Either a large cave system or an area where material has been displaced. Marcus studied the sonar data with obvious concern. What's the potential for further collapse? The question hung in the air as the team analyzed the geological evidence. Sarah realized that Marcus was thinking beyond the immediate scientific implications to potential threats to shipping, coastal infrastructure, and marine ecosystems. The methodical way he assessed risks and calculated probabilities reminded her of how he'd read the distant fishing boat's wake pattern, but applied to stakes that could affect thousands of people. We need core samples from multiple points along this formation, Dr. Patterson decided. And we need to map the extent of the instability. The survey mission expanded from a single-day operation to a comprehensive 3-day investigation. Sarah found herself working closely with Marcus and the Navy team, learning to interpret sonar data, coordinate ROV operations, and analyze geological samples with equipment far more sophisticated than anything available at her research station. More than the technical aspects, Sarah was fascinated by watching Marcus work with the Navy crew. It was clear that his reputation preceded him. The sailors treated him with a respect that went beyond courtesy to senior personnel. They sought his opinion on technical decisions, deferred to his judgment on safety protocols, and obviously trusted his expertise completely. On the second day, while analyzing rock samples in the ship's laboratory, Sarah worked up the courage to ask Marcus about his background more directly. How long were you a SEAL? She asked as they catalogued mineral compositions that would help determine the age and stability of the underwater formations. 12 years active duty, Marcus replied, not looking up from the microscope he was using to examine sediment samples. Specialized in underwater reconnaissance and precision operations.
What kind of precision operations?
Marcus was quiet for a moment, and Sarah thought he might deflect the question as he had on the beach. But, instead, he set down his tools and looked at her directly.
Long-range underwater infiltration. Target acquisition and elimination.
Precision shooting in extreme conditions. His voice was matter-of-fact, but Sarah heard something deeper beneath the professional summary. I was good at calculating distance, environmental factors, and precision placement under pressure. Sarah processed this information, realizing that Marcus's ability to read minute details at extreme distances wasn't just an interesting skill but a capability that had been developed for life and death situations.
How long range are we talking about? My longest confirmed shot was 3,294 meters.
Underwater to surface target, accounting for water refraction, current patterns, target movement, and multiple environmental variables. The number meant nothing to Sarah initially, but Marcus seemed to expect it would be significant.
Is that exceptional?
It's a record that still stands, Marcus said simply.
And it was the last shot I ever took in military service.
Something in his tone suggested there was a story behind that final shot, one that might explain why Marcus had been sitting alone on Mendocino Beach when she'd found him. Sarah sensed that pushing for details would be unwelcome, but she filed the information away as another piece of the puzzle that was Marcus Chen. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent call from the ROV control station. Lieutenant Commander Torres had discovered something that required immediate attention from both the geological and military perspectives. You need to see this, Torres said as they joined her at the monitor displays. We've found what appears to be debris from a sunken vessel embedded in the canyon wall. The ROV cameras revealed twisted metal and composite materials that were clearly artificial rather than geological. But, more concerning, some of the debris showed characteristics that suggested it wasn't from a commercial fishing or pleasure vessel.
Can you get closer readings on the material composition?
Marcus asked, his tone taking on the focused intensity Sarah had learned to recognize when he was processing potential security implications. The enhanced sensor readings confirmed Marcus's suspicions. The debris included materials and construction techniques that suggested military origin, though the age and condition made definitive identification difficult. We need to report this through different channels, Marcus said quietly to Dr. Patterson. This could be related to classified operations or lost military assets.
The discovery transformed their scientific survey into something more complex.
While Sarah and Dr. Patterson continued their analysis of the geological formations and marine life disruptions, Marcus worked with Lieutenant Commander Torres to document the debris field and initiate appropriate notifications through military channels. Sarah watched this process with growing appreciation for the complexity of Marcus's expertise. He could seamlessly transition from helping her analyze shell specimens to coordinating sophisticated underwater operations to managing potential security concerns, all with the same methodical precision and calm professionalism. On the final day of the survey, as they completed their mapping of the underwater canyon system and collected final samples, Marcus approached Sarah with an unexpected proposition.
The Navy crew is heading back to their base in San Diego, he said. But I'm staying in the area for a few more days. Would you be interested in some advanced training in precision observation and environmental assessment?
Sarah looked at him with surprise.
What kind of training?
The same skills I used to read that fishing boat's wake pattern from 3 miles away.
Applied to marine biology and environmental science rather than military operations.
Marcus's expression grew more serious. What we've discovered here suggests there might be other environmental changes happening that aren't being detected by standard monitoring systems.
Skills in long-range observation and environmental analysis could be valuable for your research.
The proposition intrigued Sarah more than she expected. She'd always prided herself on her observational skills, but Marcus's ability to detect and interpret details at extreme distances represented a level of precision that could revolutionize her fieldwork.
What would this training involve? She asked.
Marcus smiled, and Sarah caught a glimpse of the intensity that had made him exceptional at his former profession.
We'd start with basic distance estimation and detail recognition.
Then, move to environmental factor analysis and precision measurement. Eventually, if you're interested and capable, long-range target acquisition principles.
Target acquisition for marine biology? The same skills that allow precise targeting allow precise observation and data collection.
Distance, environmental conditions, movement patterns, probability calculations. Marcus gestured toward the ocean surrounding their research vessel.
All directly applicable to understanding marine ecosystems and environmental changes.
Sarah realized that Marcus was offering to share expertise that had taken years to develop and had probably been classified until recently. More than that, he was suggesting a collaboration that could combine her scientific knowledge with his operational precision in ways that might produce unprecedented research capabilities. Looking out over the water where their survey had revealed underwater formations and environmental disruptions invisible to standard observation, Sarah felt the same excitement she'd experienced finding her first rare shell specimen. But, this time, the discovery wasn't something the ocean had brought to shore. It was an opportunity to develop new ways of seeing and understanding the world that Marcus's specialized training could provide. The shell collecting that had brought them together now seemed like preparation for something far more significant. Marcus was offering to teach her to see the ocean with the same precision that had made him legendary in military circles, applied to scientific challenges that could advance understanding of marine ecosystems in fundamental ways. As their research vessel headed back toward shore with data that would reshape understanding of the region's underwater geography, Sarah realized she was facing a choice that could transform not just her research capabilities but her entire approach to scientific observation. Marcus's world of precision operations was offering to intersect with her passion for marine science in ways she'd never imagined possible. 3 months after their first meeting on Mendocino Beach, Sarah found herself lying prone on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, her eye pressed to the scope of a precision rifle that Marcus had modified for scientific observation rather than military operations. The weapon's targeting system had been adapted with advanced optics and environmental sensors that could measure wind speed, humidity, temperature gradients, and atmospheric pressure with extraordinary accuracy.
Range to target?
Marcus asked quietly from his position beside her, where he monitored additional environmental data through equipment that looked like it belonged in a NASA mission control center. Sarah studied the whale pod through her scope, noting their movement patterns and calculating the distance to the lead female whose behavior she'd been tracking for the past hour.
2,400 meters, give or take 50.
Give or take isn't acceptable for this kind of observation, Marcus replied, his tone gentle but firm. Environmental factors at that distance create enough variables that 50 meters of uncertainty makes your data unreliable.
What's the wind doing between here and the target zone?
Sarah took a deeper breath and applied the techniques Marcus had taught her over the past weeks. She studied the water surface patterns, noting how wind created different textures at various distances. She factored in the temperature differential between land and sea that created predictable air current patterns. She observed the behavior of seabirds at different altitudes to gauge wind speed and direction at multiple levels.
Wind is variable. Surface winds from the southwest at approximately 12 knots.
Higher altitude winds from the west at maybe 20 knots, creating a shear pattern that would affect visibility and measurement accuracy.
Sarah paused, recalculating.
Target distance is 2,370 meters, plus or minus 15 meters.
Better. Now what's the whale pod telling you about current patterns and food distribution?
This was the kind of analysis that Sarah had never imagined possible before Marcus began training her. The precision observation skills he developed for military operations translated remarkably well to marine biology, allowing her to gather data about animal behavior and environmental conditions with unprecedented accuracy and range. Through her modified scope, Sarah could observe details in whale behavior that were invisible to standard research techniques. She could track individual animals across vast distances, noting feeding patterns, social interactions, and responses to environmental changes that occurred far beyond the range of typical observation methods.
The lead female is adjusting course, Sarah reported, tracking the subtle changes in the whale's movement pattern.
She's responding to something in the water column approximately 400 meters ahead of the current pod position.
Marcus checked his environmental sensors. Depth sounder shows a significant change in bottom topography at that location.
Underwater ridge system that would create upwelling currents and concentrate plankton. The whale is reading ocean conditions that we can barely detect with sophisticated equipment, Sarah marveled. She's navigating to feeding areas based on environmental cues that require incredible precision to interpret. Exactly the same principle that makes long-range precision shooting possible, Marcus observed. Understanding environmental factors, calculating probability, and making precise adjustments based on multiple variables.
The whale is doing underwater what we're learning to do from surface observation.
Sarah had initially been skeptical when Marcus proposed adapting sniper techniques for scientific research. The idea of using military precision shooting principles for marine biology had seemed like an unusual combination of completely unrelated skill sets. But, over weeks of training, she'd discovered that the fundamental principles were remarkably similar. Both required exceptional observational skills, systematic analysis of environmental factors, precise measurement and calculation, and the ability to maintain focus and accuracy under challenging conditions. The patience required for long-range shooting translated directly to the extended observation periods necessary for gathering meaningful data about animal behavior. More than the technical skills, Marcus was teaching Sarah to think about observation and measurement with a level of precision that transformed her approach to scientific research. Every environmental factor became significant.
Every detail could provide crucial information.
Every measurement had to account for variables that might seem insignificant but could dramatically affect accuracy.
Target is changing course again, Sarah reported.
The pod is moving toward deeper water, probably following the upwelling current we identified.
Distance and bearing?
Sarah made the calculations automatically now, factoring in all the environmental variables that Marcus had taught her to recognize.
2,700 meters, bearing 247 degrees. Rate of movement suggests they're following a thermal gradient boundary. Marcus nodded approvingly.
You're tracking multiple targets across extreme distances while accounting for environmental factors that most researchers never consider. 3 months ago, you were limited to observations within a few hundred meters of shore.
It was true.
Sarah's research capabilities had expanded dramatically under Marcus's training. She could now gather data about marine life behavior across ranges that had previously been impossible for land-based observation. More importantly, she'd learned to integrate environmental analysis into her research in ways that provided insights into ecosystem relationships that weren't apparent through standard methods. The training hadn't been limited to long-range observation. Marcus had taught her to read weather patterns, calculate tidal influences, interpret water conditions through visual analysis, and understand how multiple environmental factors interacted to influence marine life behavior. Skills that he'd developed for mission planning and tactical operations proved directly applicable to scientific research and environmental monitoring. There's something else you should see, Marcus said, pointing toward a different section of ocean. 2 o'clock, extreme range. Apply what you've learned about reading surface conditions and watercolor variations. Sarah swung her scope to the indicated area, initially seeing nothing but open ocean. But, applying Marcus's training, she began to notice subtle differences in watercolor and surface texture that suggested something beneath the surface. After several minutes of careful observation, she detected movement patterns that were too regular and coordinated to be natural. Submarine, she said finally. Nuclear submarine, probably military, running at periscope depth.
Distance?
Sarah made the complex calculations, factoring in atmospheric conditions, water refraction, and the subtle visual cues that revealed the submarine's presence.
4,200 meters. Maybe a little farther.
Marcus was quiet for a moment, then handed her a different piece of equipment that looked like a combination rangefinder and computer.
Use this to confirm your estimate.
The advanced rangefinder provided a precise measurement, 4,197 meters.
Sarah looked up from the device with amazement.
I was within 3 meters at that distance.
You've learned to see what most people can't detect at any distance, Marcus said with obvious pride. But, more importantly, you understand how to integrate multiple sources of information to reach accurate conclusions under challenging conditions. Sarah realized that Marcus was describing skills that went far beyond marine biology or military operations. He'd taught her a systematic approach to observation and analysis that could be applied to almost any field requiring precise measurement and environmental assessment. The discipline required for long-range precision shooting had trained her mind to process complex information with accuracy that seemed almost superhuman. Now comes the real test, Marcus said, producing a tablet computer that displayed detailed topographic and bathymetric maps of the coastal region. I want you to identify optimal observation points for monitoring the underwater canyon system we discovered during the survey mission. This was the practical application that Sarah had been preparing for without fully realizing it. The geological instability they documented required ongoing monitoring, but the remote location and challenging conditions made standard research approaches impractical. Marcus was proposing to use precision observation techniques to establish a monitoring system that could track environmental changes across distances and in conditions that would be impossible for conventional methods. Sarah studied the maps, applying everything she'd learned about sightlines, environmental factors, and measurement accuracy. She identified locations that would provide optimal observation angles while accounting for weather patterns, tidal influences, and seasonal changes that could affect visibility and measurement precision. These three positions would give overlapping coverage of the entire geological formation, she concluded, marking locations on the map. With the right equipment, we could monitor seismic activity, marine life patterns, and water condition changes without requiring expensive underwater deployments. Marcus examined her selections with the same careful attention he'd given to her distance calculations. Excellent choices. You're thinking like an operations planner now, considering multiple factors and contingencies. Is that what this has been? Sarah asked, suddenly realizing the broader implications of her training. Preparation for establishing a monitoring operation? Partly, Marcus admitted. But, more than that, it's been about developing capabilities that could revolutionize how environmental research is conducted. The skills you've learned could be taught to other researchers, creating new methods for gathering data about environmental changes that are currently invisible to standard monitoring systems. Sarah understood now that Marcus's training had been preparing her for something much more significant than improved personal research capabilities. He'd been developing a proof of concept for applying military precision techniques to environmental science, using her marine biology expertise as a test case for broader applications. The submarine you spotted, Marcus continued, represents exactly the kind of environmental factor that standard research doesn't account for. Military operations, shipping traffic, underwater construction, all create environmental impacts that affect marine ecosystems but remain invisible to most research methods. Sarah looked out over the ocean with her newly trained eyes, seeing layers of information that had been invisible just months earlier. Whale pods following thermal gradients with precision navigation. Submarines creating wake patterns in water column disturbances. Ocean currents carrying chemical signatures that reveal geological activity hundreds of miles away. Weather systems developing based on atmospheric pressure gradients that could be detected days before standard meteorological instruments registered changes. You've taught me to see the ocean as a complex information system, she said, finally, understanding the full scope of what she'd learned. Every detail contains data about environmental conditions, animal behavior, human activities, and natural processes. Marcus nodded. Precision observation isn't just about accuracy. It's about recognizing that everything in the environment is connected, and small changes in one system can predict significant changes in others. Military operations depend on that understanding. Scientific research can benefit from the same approach. As the sun began to set over the Pacific, Sarah packed up the sophisticated equipment that had become as familiar to her as her original shell-collecting tools. But she realized that the real tools Marcus had given her weren't mechanical. They were mental disciplines, observational techniques, and analytical methods that would transform her approach to research for the rest of her career.
The challenge Marcus had originally mentioned, hitting a target at 3,294 meters, now seemed like a metaphor for the precision required to understand environmental systems with accuracy sufficient to predict and respond to changes. Sarah hadn't learned to be a sniper, but she had learned to apply the same systematic precision to scientific observation that had made Marcus legendary in military circles. 3 months earlier, she'd been collecting shells on a beach, content with the small discoveries that patient searching could provide. Now she possessed capabilities that could detect environmental changes across vast distances and connect seemingly unrelated observations into comprehensive understanding of complex ecological systems. The shell she'd collected that first morning remained in her apartment, carefully catalogued and displayed. But they had been joined by datasets, environmental measurements, and photographic documentation that represented a new approach to marine science. Sarah's simple hobby had evolved into participation in developing research methods that could advance environmental science in fundamental ways. Marcus had given her the tools to see farther, measure more precisely, and understand environmental relationships that had previously been invisible. More importantly, he'd taught her that precision and patience could reveal secrets that the ocean was always sharing, but only with those who knew how to observe with the systematic accuracy that Marcus had spent years developing. Standing on the cliff overlooking the Pacific as darkness gathered, Sarah realized she was no longer just a shell collector who had met an interesting stranger. She was a researcher equipped with capabilities that few scientists possessed, trained by someone whose expertise had been developed under the highest possible stakes, prepared to contribute to understanding environmental challenges that could affect the future of marine ecosystems. The ocean spread before them in the gathering darkness, holding secrets that Sarah now possessed the skills to discover. Marcus had challenged her to achieve precision that most people considered impossible, and, in meeting that challenge, she'd discovered capabilities she hadn't known she possessed. The real target had never been distance measurement or environmental analysis. It had been the development of observational skills that could bridge the gap between military precision and scientific discovery, creating new possibilities for understanding the world with unprecedented accuracy.